So Natalie, first of all, welcome. Secondly, would you mind taking the lead here and perhaps introducing yourself a bit more fully to the audience?
Of course, absolutely. Happy to be here. And as you may tell from the accent, I'm based out of the UK. I'm born and raised in Nottingham, still living here in Nottingham. Fell into this industry pretty much by chance, as so many people do in IRT/RTSM/ whatever your preferred acronym is for this technology. I was a pretty studious student back in the day, but decided rather an unconventional route, I guess, that I wanted to just go straight into work, straight from school. Didn't really know what profession I wanted to be. Worked at a local newspaper to begin with. And then in 2003, which is probably going to start giving away my age, I applied for a role on a technical help desk with a company called Climphone, locally in Nottingham. And that advert mentioned randomization. Embarrassingly, didn't really know what randomization was back then. But at the grand age of 19, my application was successful and I had my first ever role in clinical trials. Didn't take long for me to be really deep in all the technicalities of studies, how they worked, all the problems that sites have, a whole variety of different designs, integrations, sponsors, CROs. So it really, really did teach me this trade.
I suppose it begs the obvious question, though. Are you a county or a forest fan? I should probably ask that.
Forest fan.
Definitely forest.
Forest going through.
Excellent. Good. I asked that because now that I live up near Manchester, I'm constantly being asked, and I have to respond with none of the above, as I'm still rooted firmly in the Torquay United fan club. But there we go. So one of the things I'm excited about having you here today is you've got quite a varied background. I mean, you've seen everything from not quite the genesis of RTSM, but the maturing perspective of IRT, RTSM, as you say, through into delivering that across platforms into your current role. So if I think about data management, how do you see data management changing over the last 20 years? What are kind of your observations of where we've been in particular?
I mean, when I first started out, the space I was in, everything was phone-based. Almost everything was phone-based. The sites were calling in, they were listening to prompts. Those transactions on the phone could take quite a long time if there was a lot of things that they needed to record. We even did things like ePro diary scales back in the day over the phone, the patients calling in and pressing what they felt like on the scale today using the phone, which still people that are new to the industry find hard to believe, but I think we all lived through that. And then I guess more data managing, a lot of the systems that I was working in underneath that, and then some of the systems that I started to work in as I got into more of the e-clinical space, everything felt a little bit like a glorified Excel sheet back in the day. They were cutting edge at the time, but looking back now, there was just lots of glorified Excel sheets as databases that you would go in and manipulate, and it didn't feel like there was a whole bunch of control or intelligence around how those were working. So I've obviously seen things change significantly over the years as we've moved to web-based and then cloud-based solutions, and that they've now taken that limelight. And I never want to get asked the question again whether we want to build an IVR for these types of data transactions in the future. Certainly at Veeva, I've seen the evolution of people being able to enter data in far, far more seamless ways than I have done in the past. And that has been really exciting to work with. I'm going to admit that I do get frustrated that some of those same challenges are probably still around in the RTSM space, maybe specifically. There's still problems, I think, with handling complexity. There's still problems with what data should be where and when sometimes. And I think that we've got an amazing opportunity, and I have in this role at Veeva, to work with team members such as yourself, to work with industry peers, to look at how do we make sure that we now resolve all of those challenges, and look at where have we come from, what can we learn from that, and how can we make that better for all of the stakeholders in the future.
What are the challenges you're trying to address in that space for that?
I think I guess the challenges, there's some real high level challenges, and then there's some smaller challenge. Well, they're not small challenges, but there's more, I guess, some feature function style challenges that we've been really looking to address within the data management space. I feel like one of the things within data management when I've been looking at this is to try and learn from the past. Like when I look to the future in this role, I'm making sure that I'm always taking into account what we've done in the past. And I think that there are some long-standing things out there in the industry that are causing us challenges that sometimes we might not even know are there. So bear with me, because, for example, one came up recently where I was chatting with the data management team at a sponsor about mid-study amendments. We were talking about them being genuinely planned. They were planned mid-study amendments. It was a very adaptive trial. We knew there was going to be new cohorts. We knew there would be new doses. We knew there would be new visit schedules. It's nothing new. I mean, adaptive designs have been around for some time. But what I found was that people were still doing things in the system based on decisions that were made 10, 15 years ago because someone had a kappa. Something went wrong 10, 15 years ago. There was a kappa. They changed things in a certain way. And that process has been like that because of that kappa. Now, don't want to belittle the kappa because one critical thing in RTSM data, of course, can make or break a study. But I also think that those incidents that we probably all lived through 10, 15, 20 years ago, the way they were solved back then were solved very differently to the way that we could do things now that we've got more modernized tool sets. So I do think as part of this role, as I'm working with sponsors and data management, I think not only should we be planning for all of the trials of the future, we should be going back and looking at why did we do things the way that we're doing them? And is there something that we can now do now that we've got different technologies in place to do things more efficiently and tackle it from both angles?
See, I like the way you put that, Natalie, because one of the things I like the way you've introduced this concept of anxiety versus confidence. And I think when we let anxiety of change win out, I feel like we are anticipating failure. And if we could flip that question and actually go into the confidence zone where you're anticipating success, you change the question, you change the direction, and then you don't let the past inhibit the future. This idea that a kappa, as genuine as I'm sure it was, and at the time of technology, I'm sure it was something that needed to be mandated, but the world has moved on a long way. And today, I think we need to move more and more into that confident, striding concept. You use the past to challenge ourselves, but that surely is part of the strategy, or to think through where have we failed in the past, and maybe where have we learned lessons in the past that should be maintained. But using that learning to kind of set the scene for the next steps, I think, is a critical part. What about other problems? You mentioned data managers and problem solving. How are you seeing the world of data management? Clash, combine, sit comfortably with the world of site supplies and randomization?
There's some harmonious things for us to work on, and there's some areas where I think there's some silos that we can probably better come together on. I mean, an obvious one being that you've got RTSM, you've got EDC. I think we're in an era now where populating data in the CRF automatically, real time, it should just be a given. So it's now more about what's the next level of that? How do we make sure that we connect the technologies, but that we don't compromise the design on either one of the sides?
Yep.
For example, with Vault EDC, we've now got things, and this is where maybe I am getting a bit feature function, but things now like autosave and some of the levels of dynamics that you can incorporate into a CRF. RTSM needs to think about those as part of the integration. It also needs to think about how to handle data changes better, how to handle the audit trail when you're checking forms in and out using an integration. So I do think that now that we have the technologies that we have, like the more modernized approaches, we can look at better connected workflows without compromising on either side, that someone has to design something in one way because the integration needs it, or on the other side because the integration needs it. It should be that everyone can do what they need and the two things come together. And I think that that's where there's some conversations that we can have jointly within RTSM and data management to make sure that everyone gets the best of both.
And that's interesting because you're leaning there into this concept of the total experience of a clinical trial, which is something I'm very focused on at the moment, because I think it's that concept of trading one benefit for one user versus possible negative impact for another.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be prepared that some advances will cause some challenges in other areas, but the totality of the experience could still remain very, very positive. I do think that's a close piece to look at. I also want to just think through, so your success with Veeva RTSM, that obviously means you're working with other EDC solutions as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit how you see, from a data management perspective, the integration strategy. Are we a one-way integration or a two-way integration industry now? How do you see that developing over time?
I think that it comes back around to what I was talking about with the partner strategy earlier, the open connectivity. I think it's only natural that we need to make sure the architecture of any systems within Veeva and then with partners and with third-party solutions, that everyone's thinking about making sure that they build open architecture to go backwards and forwards as needed. It would be easy for me to sit here and try and mandate that everything should start in RTSM because that just makes it easier. But then designs come along where I think there's a genuine reason that you start in A and integrate to B, and then vice versa. There are genuine reasons why you might go the other way. An example recently that I was chatting to customers about was they had a very, very extensive screening process with numbers of calculations, pretty large numbers of data points in the CRF. It felt very natural for that to sit within the CRF and then integrate over to RTSM. And I feel very passionately that RTSM should really, truly only be handling the minimal data that it needs to for randomization and trial supply. I think that keeps things very lean for the data managers, whether we're working with Veeva EDC or whether we're working with a third-party EDC. I think setting expectations in that way will help, and looking at standards across people's EDCs with RTSMs will help. And I know a number of sponsors have got RTSM standards now as well as EDC standards, which is an interesting area for us to look at. But I don't think that we should mandate that there's always a one path. I think it's important that we, protocol by protocol, look at what makes sense in terms of a data workflow, what ecosystems are in place, even what countries are in place for things like consent capabilities, to make sure that we're not just trying to fit everything into like a box, that we're looking at it holistically across the protocol and what's going to make for the best experience for that design and for the sites involved.
I like the way you put that, because one of the conversations I think we have on a pure DM level today is that kind of, there's two pillars that are driving us. There's the scientific, and I'll put into the science, the trial design and the true science behind a study design. And then there's operational excellence. And for me, operational excellence could be decentralizing the trial. It could be using different technologies. And I kind of try and bring the two together as a Rubik's Cube. And I try and think of solving the Rubik's Cube study by study. And one of the fears I have is that instead of just solving the typical 3x3 6-sided Rubik's Cube, we've actually created a 12x12 6-sided, or maybe it's soon to be 8 or 10 or 12-sided Rubik's, not cube anymore, but whatever shape it is. And I think that's something that I hope as an industry we'll look at very carefully. Is there are stepping stones towards, a panacea, a solution for all trials. But there's also the reality, and that is having a single solution for all trials is going to be incredibly hard, because the trial designs, the science, are changing at incredible speed. And I think, for me personally, you've got this pull tension where science is pulling really hard this way and operational excellence is pulling really hard this way. And until we put them in lockstep and they actually unite, I think we're going to be constantly challenging ourselves, which is where your relationship with me becomes even more important for this, which is quite a narrow focus of a clinical trial, but it becomes incredibly important.
Yeah. And it comes round to the data managers and then the supply managers. I've been in situations recently where that they are pulling against each other, to the point where I've even been in discussions where I've heard data management talking about using one solution and supply using another solution, and suddenly you're introducing then two RTSM solutions into a mix, which feels like it's born out of the silos, and something that I'm hoping that as I bring our product into the mix, we can make sure that we're really having conversations about to bring those two things together. Yeah. To pick up on something you just said as well about having like a one solution fits all, it's something I probably battled about for many years over, is it a one system meets everything, or is it the applications like separately? Yeah. And I think my current thinking on it is very much that if we try and build something that is everything to everyone, it becomes so huge and monolithic that how do you, like you just mentioned, how do you adapt and pivot if the science needs you to? I mean, COVID, I know at every conference, everyone's talking about this right now, but no one anticipated COVID. We don't know what the future holds. And if we don't have applications that can kind of just turn on a sixpence if they need to adapt to whatever the science or whatever society needs at that point in time, then we're going to end up with the technology holding the science back, or we're going to end up back on paper. Nobody wants to go in that direction.
No, because I think the nice thing about the last 20 years, for me, certainly DM, is the evolution of from paper to EDC to where we are now was, I really felt in the early 2000s, scientists were begging data managers to catch up. They had trial designs that we had no way to execute. All of a sudden, it feels like we've flipped that question. And now data manager and others are saying, there's a better way to do that trial. There's a better way to do that next level of scientific rigor. And as you say, I want to make sure we continue to do that. But that's where the science and the operational excellence have to stay in lockstep. Otherwise, there's a real danger we're going to try and move backwards. We've mentioned a little bit about the world of RTSM and data managers. What can data management do to help you? And what opportunities do you think we should be exploring?
I mentioned it a little while back, but I do think that I've seen RTSM standards being established. Obviously, within the world of EDC, there are CRF libraries. I think as we work on connectivity, I think there can be further conversation about how those standards come together. A really common debate that I see across RTSM and EDC sounds very simple, but gets people quite worked up, I have found, and is definitely something for us to maybe look at making sure is agreed and aligned upon, is transaction dates versus event dates. Yep. The RTSM transaction date, EDC patient event date sounds simple enough, but from the data managers I talk to, all sorts of headaches when it comes to reconciling. And I think sitting down and having conversations about things like that suddenly snowball and turn into pretty huge issues on large studies will help make sure that everyone comes to the same understandings, and that we're building solutions and taking them in the direction that this is no longer a talking point. We'll be talking about it as an issue of the past rather than a current annoyance that gets people upset on social media.
Good. And I think you can take that further as well. So I know you and I have talked about this. If you bring the sites and the clinics and the patients into that conversation, it's when does a volunteer or a potential patient, candidate patient, become a patient? When does that patient become screened? When is screened a treatment or a randomized patient, and so on and so on and so on. So I think you're absolutely right. This is the time to have those joint up conversations and actually define the user experience, but the data experience as well, so that we can share with semantics where appropriate, but share the right data to the right people at the right time, so we can actually solve these problems in one go. Cool.
Yeah, definitely. Standards, people's can use terminology that suddenly gets misinterpreted somewhere, and all of a sudden there's misunderstanding. I think if we sit and align early on in conversations on the different terminologies that maybe different systems use that can be adapted to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, it will save huge amounts of confusion when different stakeholders get around a table to talk about something.
Perfect. So data standards, an age-old conversation in the world of data management, is now the next pressing conversation between data management and trial supplies and randomization. So excellent. I was hoping that we could one day get past data standards, but perhaps today is not the day for that. If you had a magic wand, and if you could use that magic wand today to change data management and clinical trials forever, what two things that you can't do today would you enable? And what two things that really frustrate you today would you kind of resign to room 101, never to be surfaced ever again?
So my first one is probably cheating a little bit because we are currently waving that wand around to fix it. But I do think within data management, fixing communication workflows across data points, having a means of just centrally communicating across every trial data point that there is. Obviously, there's many that will originate in RTSM, removing the paper and emails and everything from that process. I'd love to get to a point where it's truly digital and not digital plus lots of communications that still happen outside of the system and workflows that still need some intervention here and there and everywhere. I'd love to be in a position where that is truly more seamless than it is today for resolving data changes, resolving data questions, queries, deviations, etc. My next one, it's not so fundamental, I guess. Like I could sit here and go, let's fix standards, let's fix connections, but it's maybe just like a really easy one that I would love to wave my wand on, which is I would love to have the most perfect compliance reporting. We obviously in RTSM deal with a lot of compliance data with things like drug accountability. EDC holds data around what visit dates there genuinely were, who came in when. And ePro and devices has got a whole lot of information, of course, about what patients say they have done or have done, both quantitative and qualitative data points. I feel like we're underutilizing that today as an industry, and that we have the data. We should be using it to look at compliance more closely, as well as doing all of our data cleaning and data reporting. I feel like compliance can really have a spotlight shone on it in the upcoming years.
Cool.
101, paper DCFs. Please, let's make them go away forever. Somebody asked me about it the other day, which made me laugh and cry. Can we have a paper DCF process? Can we scan it in? Can we scan and sign? I mean, I would love to make sure that that is never something that we talk about ever again. We shouldn't be talking about it today, but we still are. So let's put that in 101, never to be seen again.
I'm with you there, along with green pens, red pens, blue pens, black pens, but
yeah,
they're all gone.
All gone forever. And batched edit checks, batched updates, batched comparisons. One of my first jobs was to run these checks across EDC, RTSM, support portals. Like there was a whole bunch of things that we'd run these batch checks across, and then it was my job to sit and look through the results and go, well, that system should be this, and that system should be this, and that system should be this. Modern systems should be alerting as soon as those issues occur. Let's not talk about doing things in batch or doing things cross-checked. Connectivity means that should be room 101. Let's not ever bring back that concept. Let's find better, intelligent ways of monitoring what's happening across those systems.
I could not agree more, which is rare for me to say, but there we go. I want to say thank you for focusing on data flow, data standards. I think there's an automation story there, not just across data management, but across the whole clinical trial that we all need to be spending time on. That automation then does allow you to, I think, along the way, get rid of things like paper queries. We should not be getting any data cleaning happening outside of the system. And I'm going to extend paper, if you don't mind, and include Excel. And you're right, batched processes. Batch processes for me is a fantastic way of coming back to that Rubik's Cube. If we are slowing things down, the whole Rubik's Cube doesn't move at the same pace. And if it doesn't move at the same pace, it's going to break. It's as simple as that. So for me, that is a great way to sum things up. So for me, my final words are going to be to say thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time. But I would like to give you the final word. So is there anything final you would like to share with our audience about you personally, or about the mission you're on in RTSM?
No, just to say, it's been my pleasure chatting with you. We could have probably chatted for hours. I didn't even get onto supplies because I wanted to keep a data management focus here today for the audience. I could talk about supply challenges in RTSM all day. That's maybe even bigger challenges than we've talked about within data management. But as well as saying, hopefully Nottingham Forest stay in the Premier League. I hope that I get to meet people who are watching this at the upcoming Veeva Summit event and just chatting more, talking more about all of the RTSM challenges that we've seen in the past and how we're going to innovate those in the future. I feel like RTSM is sometimes the kind of forgotten child. It sometimes feels like it may have stagnated a little bit in the industry. And I really think we've got a fantastic opportunity at Veeva to bring new ideas and innovation to the table here and work with you, Richard, in data management to make that happen.